Africa started producing leaders that one cannot recognize. How many of you will forget Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic? That man who murdered little children in the streets because they did not buy a uniform from his wife. That's Jean Bedel Bokassa. How many of you will forget Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu wa Nzambanga, who changed his country's name and presided over a kleptocratic regime? The Democratic Republic of Congo is the richest resource country on earth. Conservatively, it is said that under her belly she has minerals which is equivalent to 34.1 trillion United States dollars. And yet today, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. It is the only nation on earth.
This video is to make you understand that our problem in Africa is not just the whites, but our leaders. Let me not just say much. Let's watch this together.
It is the only nation on earth which on the day of the election has its president saying, we know we ought to have elections, but we have no money to hold elections. When you see a country which has as its official name the Democratic Republic of Congo, know that there is no democracy. In fact, I dare say that any country, two countries that I know insisting on having as a part of their official name the Democratic Republic of something are never democratic. The other one is Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's as if when you can't graduate to be a doctor, you go to the church and you ask to be baptized as Dr. Mwadime. But that is not the point. The point is that who can forget Mobutu Sese Seko? Who can forget Idi Amin of Uganda? Who can forget Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia? And one can go on and on, because hygiene had started disappearing from African politics. Our agriculture was beginning to suffer. European musicians who had a little sense of guilt came to perform in Africa. Bob Geldof, to free the Ethiopians out of hunger. There was no hygiene in our politics.
Not at all.
We could not run our education systems. Our young men and women were going to India because the budgets meant for education were consumed by individuals whom we had entrusted with the task of presiding over it. Our health sectors were beginning to collapse. And as I've said before, the political leadership did not have any faith in those institutions. Typically, the typical African politician, perhaps not in Tanzania today, if they were sick, they had a cold, they would not go to Muhimbili, they would go to London. If they were Kenyan, they would not go to Kenyatta Hospital, they would run to the United Kingdom. Tragedy, no hygiene in our politics, because Africans had started engaging in theft. In fact, I used to say that African politicians were thieves. Then I went to Uganda and I was told that they are not thieves, they are looters. And when I went to Liberia last week, I was told they are not looters. I was told they are looters on an industrial scale. That is the logical metamorphosis of the African politician, whose appetite for public wealth is completely insatiable. Hygiene was disappearing from African politics, and we could see the effect of the disappearance of hygiene in African politics. But there was always the erstwhile colonial master to assist. Coup d'etats started visiting Africa. Modibo Keita in Mali was consumed. Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria was consumed. The Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah was consumed.
Very strategic.
Apollo Milton Obote was consumed. Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau was consumed. Patrice Emery Lumumba was consumed. Coups were so frequent in Africa that Afro-pessimists were now hard to say that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But even breakfast was not frequent on African tables. We could not feed ourselves
at all.
because there was no hygiene in African politics. Your typical African politicians took the view that they had a divine mission to preside over their countries. They arrogated to themselves the monopoly of wisdom. If you listen to some of them, and I listen to the radio announcements announcing the activities of one leader of an African country, Habyarimana Juvenal, it would take 3 minutes to say the things that he had done. He was the leading farmer. He was the leading singer. He was the leading intellectual. He was the leading husband. And he was the leading everything. We had monsterized our leaders, and they became immune from any kind of advice. Meanwhile, the African was suffering. The African woman who thought that upon attainment of political independence, she would now deliver in a decent hospital was still the victim of a village midwife. The African woman was suffering. The African woman who thought that they would now get water in a tap in their home was still running 5 kilometers away to get water. Meanwhile, our monster leaders were laundering their clothes in France and in Paris. The African woman who thought that they would go to Kariakoo market here in Dar es Salaam or Owino market in Kampala, Uganda, and get all the goodies could not get them because meanwhile the Minister for Agriculture had agreed that bad seed be supplied, and meanwhile we were getting mangoes from Europe. The African woman who thought that they could have food on the table could not have food on the table. We had killed all our sugar industries that we may have sugar from Brazil and Mexico.
Can you imagine?
And the African youth was no different. The African youth who thought that upon realization of independence, there would be occasion for them to get employment was now being humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America as he struggled to get the almighty green card. The young African who thought that liberation would bring something new was now struggling at the United Kingdom embassy, filling a document that is 50 pages long, being asked who their great-great-grandfathers were and what enterprise they were engaged in. And they could not stop there. They went to the Australian embassy and to the French embassy, and the treatment was the same. The African youth was being treated like a leper, like a pariah, like a subhuman being. And they were asking, for what purpose did we gain this thing called independence?
For what purpose?
And those who are not humiliated in Gambia, in Nigeria, in Niger, were crossing the Red Sea, swimming across the Mediterranean to go to Italy so that they may be enslaved anew. Meanwhile, the African leader was busy looting from their countries and buying mansions in Paris and in London and in Florida, and driving private jets and helicopters and being addressed as their excellencies and honorables instead of being addressed properly as horribles. Hygiene had disappeared in African politics, and what had started happening is that a new generation of African leaders who were dissatisfied started emerging. And one need only look at Africa in the 1980s when we begin to see the emergence of a new crop of leaders who are saying, this is not what we fought for. And I can remember so very vividly Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi in 1984 abandoning his medical studies and pursuing the Deg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and he removed Haile Mariam. And there is a sense in which some hygiene has been reintroduced in Ethiopia. And I can remember here, God works in strange ways. Idi Amin made the mortal mistake of assuming that Tanzania and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere could be poked without consequence. He tried, and he died regretting it. And this became, indeed, many of you will remember that this University of Dar es Salaam became the finishing school of latter-day revolutionaries. John Garang Dimabior was here. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was here. If they were not students, they passed through here because this was the mecca of political revolutionaries. Eduardo Mondlane was here. Samora Machel passed through here, if only for a few hours. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela passed through here. Sam Nujoma came through here. This was the baptism ground. And the high priest was Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. It was he who, in a manner of speaking, said, with this water I thee baptize, that you may go out there and change your country. And Yoweri Kaguta Museveni went out into Uganda, and there is a sense, whether you like it or not, in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which when Samora Moises Machel left this ground, he went to Mozambique, and there was a sense in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which John Garang Dimabior left here, and some hygiene was beginning to be introduced in South Sudan. Right now, the story is a little different, but one can see that there was this new crop of leaders who recognized that indeed we had to do something about it. But ladies and gentlemen, what had happened over the years? Let us ask ourselves the fate of Africa. Why I say that there is a need for political hygiene. Africa today has 54 odd countries. And allow me to take you through a tour of Africa, if the moderator will be gracious enough to give me latitude. When you start from the Cape in South Africa, there is a great country which has given birth to great men. 1912. The first political party to be founded in Africa, the African National Congress of Sir Albert Lutuli. That party has given birth to the Mandelas, to the governing Mbekis, to the Reginald Oliver Tambo. There was great pain during the apartheid regime, but wisdom prevailed upon President de Klerk. And in 1994, we created what was called a Rainbow Nation. Mandela had his honeymoon. Then came Govan Mbeki, or Thabo Mbeki, the son of Govan Mbeki. Then came Jacob Zuma. I do not know where Jacob is taking South Africa. But from where I am, there is need for hygiene in South Africa. Because that is a great country. And that is the anchor of Southern Africa.
Exactly.
Nelson Mandela left a country that was called the Rainbow Nation. Today I'm beginning to hear them talk about the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Pedi. It is your own Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere who says, katika karne ya 21 mnasema tupande basi la makabila. Hiyo ni ujinga na upumbavu.
There is need for hygiene in Africa, political hygiene. Most of the leaders are the problems in Africa. We have good leaders, understandable, but most of the African leaders are the problems in Africa. And there is need for sanitization of the political class. There should be hygiene. You've been in power for 20 years, and when you fall sick, you go to Spain, you go to London to get treatment. Then what is the need of being in power? What is the need of being on that seat when you cannot even bring standard healthcare system in your country? What is the need? Taking Africa backwards. Taking Africa backwards. Some African leaders, what they specialize in is taking Africa backwards. It is so sad. It is so sad. And it is when we wake up that we will come together as one and sanitize any leader that is not performing. They are not thieves. They are not looters. They are not looters in a commercialized standard. Can you imagine that? We have leaders that have graduated from thieves to looters in a commercialized standard. That is the kind of continent we find ourselves. So I say to you, Africans, our problems are not just the whites. Our leaders are the problems, and we are allowing this corruption to be going on for too long. We have to sanitize our politics. Anybody that is not performing, vote them out. We have to sanitize our politics. If we want to continue on this awakening mission, we have to sanitize our politics. Let the fire continue. Share this video as you're watching it. Share the video so that other Africans can watch this video and learn. We must get there together. We are taking African continent to the next level, and we must achieve that. Spread the gospel. Drop your comments, like the video, and share.